Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. So yesterday was Friday, September 11th. It was the anniversary of that tragic day 19 years ago when our country was under a terrorist attack. The towers of the World Trade Center went down, the Pentagon got hit, and a plane crashed. And our country and the world were in shock. As tragic as that day was, what came out of it was a renewed sense of what being American meant. So in honor of the anniversary of that tragic event, and in honor of the strength and patriotism and values and character that Americans demonstrated, I decided that I would share movies that were somehow related to that day. Or if not that day, other events that were similar. So today, we'll be talking about movies that show the effects of that day on Americans, or that somehow involve that day in their story. In the first segment of the show, I'll be talking about the movie Sundogs, which stars Allison Janney. This movie is about a young man who wants to be a military hero in light of what happened during 9/11. In the second segment of the show, I'll be giving my thoughts on the movie Patriots' Day, which stars Mark Wahlberg and is about the terrorist bombing that happened during the Boston Marathon in 2013. In the third segment of the show, I'll be talking about the movie All at Once, which is about a man who becomes the guardian of two girls whose parents lost their lives in the 9/11 attack. And in the final segment of the show, I'll be reviewing the movie World Trade Center, which is directed by Oliver Stone and stars Nicolas Cage, which is about the miraculous rescue of two New York Port Authority officers who were trapped in the rubble of the World Trade Center on 9/11. Something to note is that I streamed Sundogs and Patriots' Day on Netflix, and I streamed All at Once and World Trade Center on Amazon Prime. So let's dive on in. As I mentioned, I'm going to start by looking at the movie Sundogs. This movie came out in 2018. It's considered a comedy drama. It's an hour and 34 minutes long, and it is rated TVMA, meaning it's for mature audiences. And that's mostly because of language that's used in the movie. And this movie is an award-winning movie. It won Best Picture as well as Grand Jury Award at the Mammoth Film Festival. It also won the Best Actor Award for that same festival, and this was given to the actor Michael Angarano, who plays the main character, and it also won the Best Narrative Feature at the Savannah Film Festival. As I just mentioned, the director is Jennifer Morrison. She's actually done quite a bit more acting than she has directing, and she's won a number of acting awards. In terms of directing, this was her first feature film. She's also directed some episodes of television series and a short film. Michael Angarano, who is an award-winning actor and plays our protagonist Ned Shipley, has been nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award as Outstanding Guest Actor in a Drama Series for the TV series This Is Us. Other movies he's been in include For Richer or Poorer, Almost Famous, Seabiscuit, which I happen to have reviewed in the September 4th podcast, and Empire State. Melissa Benoist plays the love interest of Ned. She plays the character Tally. And she won a couple of awards through the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films USA, including Best Actress on Television for the show Supergirl, and the Breakthrough Performance Award. For the same role, she also won Choice TV Actress for Action at the Teen Choice Awards. She's been in television shows including The Good Wife and Glee, and she's been in the movies Whiplash, Danny Collins, and as it turns out, Patriots' Day, which I'll be reviewing right after this movie, and The Longest Ride. And this movie stars Allison Janney, who won an Oscar for Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role for I, Tonya, and she won a Golden Globe Award for the same role. She's been in the movies Juno, The Help, Touchy-Feely, and Tallulah, which I reviewed in the August 18th podcast. She plays Ned's mother in this movie. And lastly, I want to highlight Ed O'Neill. He plays the character Bob Garrity, who is the partner to Ned's mother, and he's been nominated for Golden Globe Awards for his performance in the TV series Married with Children, as well as nominated for Primetime Emmy Awards for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series for Modern Family. Although he's mostly been in television, he's been in such movies as Wayne's World, Spartan, Entourage, and Finding Dory. This is a fun and quirky movie. Now, that may seem like a tall order to fill, considering the impetus for this movie was 9/11. But once you see who the characters are, you'll see that that is not a far reach. The movie starts with this guy. This is our main character, Ned, and he's curled up on an oriental rug. And we see blurry images of someone shooting, and there's an explosion, and there are distant sirens. There's a young woman saying that she'll save him from the Twin Towers attack. He is dressed for combat, and he is on the prowl, seeing how he can protect the world around him. And then also in the mix is a ball game with a tiger mascot who is jumping around. Then the date flashes on the screen. It's September 11th, 2004. And he gets up from the rug, weighs himself, exercises, and he goes out for a run. As soon as he gets home, he takes off his shirt. Then his mom, played by Allison Janney, comes around and takes a picture of him. Then she hands him a special drink. And you just have the sense that this is the normal routine of every day. Like it's something that happens like clockwork. And then he also discovers that he got something in the mail. And it turns out it's the 9/11 Commission Report. And he reads it, and he types notes up on an old typewriter from along the way. Now this eventually leads to Ned getting on a bus and going to San Diego. And we come to learn that what is in San Diego is the office for the Marines. And Ned is desperate to join the Marines. He feels he needs to do something to save people's lives. And what we come to learn is this is not the first time Ned has been to this office. Now through his interactions in the morning and the way he behaves and the way he talks, you can tell Ned seems a little bit off. He's certainly quirkier. He's very rigid, maybe has some OCD. And especially when we see him in the Marine office, he is a Marine 150%. He is rigid, he is determined, he salutes everybody. And we see this in contrast to the actual Marines that are there, who are more laid back and they want Ned to be more relaxed. But it seems that Ned is much more into taking very concrete orders than he is into things that have nuance, such as relaxing and taking it easy and being more laid back. Ned asks to speak to a particular Master Sergeant, and he is told that that Master Sergeant is no longer in that office, that he has been reassigned. And so there is a new Staff Sergeant who is available to speak to Ned instead. As Ned's interactions in this Marine office continue on, I couldn't help but think in the back of my mind that the reason the Master Sergeant was reassigned was because he had had it with Ned. Ned is very persistent, and he wants what he wants. He doesn't want to take no for an answer. And if he doesn't get what he wants, he can get a little bit out of hand. There's a point where the new Staff Sergeant has a conversation with Ned, and there are some other Marines who kind of peek in the office window to see how the interaction is going. So it almost seems like there's this ongoing internal joke around how to deal with the issue of Ned. Now, Ned has already tried to become a Marine several times, and he's been rejected. This time he's come, having improved upon the things that last time he was told would be in his way. And yet the Staff Sergeant is saying that Ned still won't be a good fit. So here you have this whole plot point set out. Ned is determined to become a Marine, and this continues on throughout the movie. Later, we see Ned working at the casino, and then we see the man who is the partner of his mom, Bob, drop Ned off at work and then decide he's going to come in for a while and do a little gambling. We learn that this is an issue that is ongoing with Ned's mom. She wants him to stop gambling, and he keeps playing around with that. But then on this particular evening, he runs into a young woman. It seems like he may have seen her before, and he teases her quite a bit. Her name is Tally, and she lives in a trailer park, and she is way down on her luck. She and Ned end up crossing paths, and they form an unlikely friendship. And they do this before Tally knows who Bob actually is. A connection is not yet made that she knows Bob. And Bob was a truck driver, and we learn he has been out of work for a year or so because of a disability. And we also learn that Ned's mom is a nurse, and that she has always had a dream of being an EMT. And not just any EMT, she wants to be an EMT in New York City. As Ned continues to follow his dream, in spite of all the obstacles that are in his way, his mom starts to think more and more about her dream. And we get to see how Bob is also rather rigid. He's set in his ways and he doesn't like change. And we see that he wants to hold Ned's mother back for his own needs. And so there is a question as to whether she's going to pursue her dream or not. And similarly, we wonder if Ned is going to give up on his dream. After this last visit to the Marine office, he feels highly dejected, and he's just off track. He's not pursuing his goal. Bob, being home and not working, which is also a point of contention between him and Ned's mom, he gets tired of Ned's mopey behavior, and he plants a seed with Ned. He lets him know that the neighbor down the street, whose son is fighting in Afghanistan, has said that he wants to come home, and that maybe Ned can replace him. This gives Ned new renewed energy. And so he gets back on his horse, and he ends up going back to the Marine office, trying again, this time holding up a picture of the neighbor's son who wants to come home, and offering this opportunity for him to replace him. This time, you get this sense that the staff sergeant knows he needs to nip this in the bud. And so he gives Ned a new opportunity. He talks about how the real heroes are the ones who are protecting people close to home. Ned takes this on as a major mission. And then he meets Tally, and herself, just sort of palling around, not sure what she's going to do with her life, decides that she might as well be involved with what Ned is doing as well. Together, they become the dynamic duo. All this until she discovers, through Ned's odd ways, that he's actually pretty much living in a fantasy world, and that she's not actually really helping the world. At least not the way she thought. And in the rest of the movie, we get to see what happens to each of these characters, what choice they make, and how they come to that choice. This movie definitely has an independent movie feel to it. It seems like it must have been relatively low budget. There's only a few different places where the movie is set. And so it really is up to the actors to paint the story. This film is full of mostly two-person scenes, and there are some really key moments that make this film interesting, make the characters stand out. There's a moment where Ned and his mother are talking. She reveals her dream of becoming an EMT. And there's a really wonderful back and forth between the two of them that lets them both discover a little bit more about themselves. There's also a great scene where Ned's mom is talking to Bob. And she talks about how they never travel anywhere. And he's about to say, well, we've been to Lake Havasu, and she cuts him off and says, don't talk about Lake Havasu, as if that is like a foreign country. Bob talks about how being a truck driver, he's on the road all the time. And when he comes home from the road, travel is not his highest priority. But she's starting to see life pass by, and she wants something more. You get the sense that in the back of her mind, this is all about if not now, when. And with this, it seems Bob is forced to grow. He is forced to see that the world does not revolve around him, and it's time to not be so controlling and let others do what they want to do. And there's also a really sweet scene between Tally and Ned. Ned goes with Tally to her trailer, and she reveals history about her family and how she is alone. Seeing as Ned is kind of missing a bit of an emotional filter, he's able to ask outright questions about Tally and her past and her mother that it seems nobody probably has ever asked her before. And she shares it, and she feels this intimacy that's created between her and Ned, something that's really special. And it seems she's naive enough that she sees Ned as just more serious, but not necessarily that there's something a little bit more off about him. But also because of that, they are able to forge a really great friendship. And I love how this shows that it doesn't matter who you are, everyone is capable of love and being a friend. And then there's a scene that we see with Bob and Ned. And you get to see how Bob really treats Ned. He definitely takes advantage of Ned and his disability, and at the same time, it seems Ned has also gotten under his skin, and this scene shows that. Now, one scene that stood out to me that I am still not completely sure about is there's a point where Tally comes back to the trailer park and finds that she's been locked out of her trailer. She's not been able to afford rent. And the trailer park manager, you can tell, likes Tally, and he seems to really regret having to tell her the news. But he kind of offers a proposal to her that if she does him a favor, then maybe he can help her out and unlock the door. All I'll say is that Tally's response was a little surprising to me. The character of Tally is someone who seems to try to get away with things because she just has to survive. And she may out in the world be considered more of a liar, or of someone who's going to try and get away with something. And yet there's a real innocence about her. And if anything, she doesn't play the stereotypical girl who lives in a trailer park. But her decision and how easily she comes to it did leave me a little confused. I felt the acting was very good in this movie. There was a lot of connection among the characters, and each character was very well defined. The script was also tight, and I didn't really find any holes. But what I will say is the storyline itself, well, it wasn't a story that I felt super excited about, and after watching the movie, I found the movie was really enjoyable, but I wasn't leaping off my seat thinking, everybody has to see this. Also, I didn't love the fact that Ned had this kind of disability. I felt in a way he was made fun of, and the disability was a little bit made fun of in this movie. I didn't feel that was a positive. And it also felt the use of 9/11 was more of a jumping off point, and I felt there was a bit of a missed opportunity to integrate it into the story in a way that the audience would take it a bit more seriously. It just feels like 9/11 is not a light subject matter, and that this movie kind of attempted to make it that. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a most excellent movie, I would give this movie a 7. It was well done, and aside from the caveats I mentioned, I think this movie is a reasonable use of your time. It has a deeper message about pursuing what you want to pursue, and also around what you want to pursue may not look the way you think it does. And also, there may be more to people than what you see on the surface. Now stay tuned for the next segment of the show, and I'll be looking at the movie Patriots Day after the break.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Thank you for joining the second segment of the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron, and in the last segment, I talked about the movie Sundogs. I'm now going to discuss the movie Patriots Day. Although this movie is not based on 9/11, it is based on what I believe is the next terrorist attack that we faced in America. It happened at the Boston Marathon in 2013. The movie is about the bombing and how justice was served to those who were responsible. Now, this movie is of personal interest to me because I'm from Massachusetts. I lived in Boston for many years, and like many people in Massachusetts, growing up I watched the marathon on TV, and eventually I got to see it live. I believe Patriots Day is only celebrated in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It is not a federal holiday, but it is known far and wide in Massachusetts that it's the day that the Boston Marathon happens. It's a day full of amazing stories of the different people who decide to run the marathon. And it's a day of real pride for people who live in Massachusetts. This movie came out in 2016. It's 2 hours and 13 minutes long. It's rated R for violence, realistic graphic injury images, language, and some drug use. It's based on a book, and the book is called Boston Strong. It's by Casey Sherman and Dave Wedge. It is also a drama and, clearly, based on real life, and it's considered an emotional and suspenseful movie. And the movie won some interesting awards. It received the Top 10 Films Award for the National Board of Review USA. It also received an award for Best Performance by an Asian Not Asked to Use an Accent, and that was for the actor Jimmy O. Yang, and that's through the All Deaf Movie Awards. The movie was directed by Peter Berg, and he also is one of the writers for the script as well as one of the story developers. He himself is an actor, in fact has more acting credits than directing credits, and was nominated with the cast for Outstanding Drama Series for Friday Night Lights at the Primetime Emmy Awards, and he was also nominated for Outstanding Director for a Drama Series for Friday Night Lights, also for the Emmy Awards. In terms of directing, he has directed movies such as Very Bad Things, Hancock, Lone Survivor, and Spencer Confidential, which I reviewed in my July 28th podcast. This movie has an amazing cast. It stars Mark Wahlberg, and as you may know, he's been nominated for 2 Academy Awards, one for Best Motion Picture of the Year for The Fighter, and Best Performance by an Actor in a Supporting Role for The Departed. And he was nominated for Golden Globes for those same roles. He's been in such movies as Three Kings, Planet of the Apes, The Perfect Storm, The Lovely Bones, and Lone Survivor. The movie also stars Michelle Monaghan. She's been nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role in a Series, Miniseries, or Motion Picture Made for Television for True Detective, and she was nominated for Best Supporting Actress for Kiss Kiss Bang Bang by the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films USA, and she has been nominated for a number of other awards, including Best Acting Ensemble for Gone Baby Gone by the Broadcast Film Critics Association Awards. Other movies she's been in include The Bourne Supremacy, North Country, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and Mission Impossible Fallout. And this movie stars J.K. Simmons, who won an Academy Award for Best Performance by an Actor in a Supporting Role for the movie Whiplash, and he won a Golden Globe for that performance as well. He's been in a lot of television and movies. TV appearances include being in the series Law and Order, The Closer, and Veronica Mars, and he's been in such movies as Juno, Up in the Air, La La Land, and The Bachelors. And I've talked about him in the movie The Bachelors as well as the movie Dark Skies in past podcasts. This movie also stars John Goodman. He won a Golden Globe Award for Best Performance by an Actor in a Television Series, Comedy or Musical for the series Roseanne. He won the Best Supporting Actor for Barton Fink for the 2020 awards, and he won Best Supporting Actor for the movie Flight for the AARP Movies for Grown-Ups Awards, as well as Best Supporting Actor for 10 Cloverfield Lane at the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films USA. And that is among other wins and nominations. Besides being in a lot of television, he's been in such movies as Coyote Ugly, Beyond the Sea, Speed Racer, Argo, Trumbo, and Atomic Blonde. And this movie stars Rachel Brosnahan. She won Golden Globes for Best Performance by an Actress in a Television Series, Musical, or Comedy for The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel 2 years in a row. And she's won other awards for the same role, and I have to say I did not even recognize her in this role. She was completely different from the character she plays in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Well, she has also mostly been in television, including the series House of Cards, Manhattan, and 50 States of Fright. She has also been in such movies as The Finest Hours, Change in the Air, and Boomtown. And last but not least, this movie stars Kevin Bacon. He's also a Golden Globe winner, having won Best Performance by an Actor in a Miniseries or a Motion Picture Made for Television for Taking Chance. He also won an Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films Award for Best Actor on Television for the series The Following. He tied with Bryan Cranston for Breaking Bad for that award. And he won Broadcast Film Critics Association Awards Best Actor Award for Murder in the First. This among other nominations and awards. He's been in the movies JFK, A Few Good Men, Apollo 13, Mystic River, and Frost Nixon. And with such a star-studded cast, this movie did not disappoint. I remember when this movie came out, and it felt like it came out just on the heels of the event happening. It was several years, but it seemed very soon. Watching it now, it feels like our country has gone through so much that it was a bit easier to see this event was not quite as fresh. This movie starts off where we see a bunch of different characters doing different things. So in the opening, we have Mark Wahlberg's character, who is Tommy Saunders. He is a police officer, and it appears that he has been on some level of probation. He is with a few other officers outside an apartment door, getting ready to bust through because they need to talk to somebody who's in that apartment. Eventually, the police commissioner, who's played by John Goodman, shows up at this apartment, and he makes it clear to Tommy that he will not be back to regular duty until he fulfills one last assignment, which is to work at the Boston Marathon the next day. Next, we go to an apartment. This is the Kensky and Downs residence. Jessica Kensky, who's played by Rachel Brosnahan, comes home with a pizza. It appears that she is a nurse, and she greets her husband, Patrick Downs, played by Christopher O'Shea, and they have a really fun banter. They talk about the Red Sox and how to pronounce socks in a Boston accent, and he is a student working on his dissertation. Next, we see an MIT student who's working on a contraption in a lab, and there's a security guard who is flirting with her. He's very interested in her romantically, and the two have a connection. The next new character we see is Carol Saunders, Tommy's wife. She's asleep when Tommy comes home late at night, and he is just getting his clothes for the next day because he's going to have to get up super early to go to the marathon. Then we see a young Asian man who's FaceTiming his parents and shows off his new car. Then we see the Sarney residence, and this is where we see a woman playing with a toddler, and there's a man who's shaving his beard, and a younger man who appears to be the brother of this man shaving the beard. The woman wears a habib, so we know that this is probably a Muslim household. And then we see the home of where J.K. Simmons lives. He plays Sergeant Jeffrey Pugliese, and he's a leader in the city of Watertown, which is just outside of Boston. With all this groundwork set, the audience gets very curious about each of these characters and what their lives are like. We get an inside glimpse, but just enough to make us want to know more. And then we wonder, how are they going to be involved in this story? Because the fact is, we know this story is about the Patriots' Day bombing. So the movie has to be about something that's going to keep our interest. And what it does is it helps us get up close and personal with a number of the key stories that happens during that day. We get to see, after the bombing, Kevin Bacon's character show up, and he's with the FBI. He makes the judgment call that this is a federal crime. We get to see Jessica Kensky and Patrick Downs as they are close to the finish line right by where the bombing takes place. We get the inside story of the two brothers who were the terrorists that actually made the bombing happen. And we get to see the security guard as well as the Asian student and how they're involved when the two brothers were trying to get away. An amazing thing is the brothers, as we know from history, were caught within just a few days after the bombing. This movie lets us be a fly in the wall. We get to see what happens with each of the sets of characters within the movie, how they're impacted, the decisions they make when it comes to bringing the two terrorists to justice. Because we know what happens because of history, there is some tough stuff in this movie. It shows the actual bombing at the marathon. It does an incredible job of showing the pain, the injuries, the traumas. I actually was kind of blown away by how it was recreated. But knowing that the bombing is going to happen and having become attached to several of the characters, I found myself really tense and sitting on the edge of my seat, knowing what was going to happen and wondering how the people who were at the marathon were going to be affected. Because that's really the one thing that we don't really know. Again, this movie helps make these stories personal. It puts the face on some of the victims of that day, as well as follow-up incidents that happen as a result of working to capture these two terrorists. I think this movie did an amazing job of painting the characters, of showing what they're about, but also of showing what has been coined Boston pride. Throughout the movie, we see an unwavering commitment to the people of Massachusetts who want answers and who want to see justice served. Now, Mark Wahlberg, I would say he is the Massachusetts actor. He has done a number of movies that take place in Massachusetts, especially in Boston. He knows the accent, he knows the people, he does a great job with this. And I would say, having recently seen Spencer Confidential and now this movie, and they were directed by the same director, but Mark Wahlberg is a different person in both. He's a police officer in both, and yet he is not the same character. So good for him for making differentiations and going deeper. Granted, he does seem to always play characters that are a bit rebellious and who are driven to do the right thing. I also love John Goodman in this movie. He plays an authority figure. I'm so used to seeing him in a more comedic role. I felt he did a wonderful job, and there were moments where I didn't even recognize him. His face looked so different. He really transformed into another character. And besides the bombing itself at the marathon, There were some really amazing scenes in this movie. Scenes that stand out to me are after the bombing, when Tommy Saunders is at the finish line, the bomb has happened. He's kind of the lead police officer down there, and he didn't know what happened, and he had to figure everything out. He did an incredible job as the police officer, organizing the men, getting ambulances down there, helping people who needed help. It really gave you a sense of what the police went through on that day. There's a whole other series of scenes that have to do with when the two brother terrorists are looking to get out of Boston. And they have a plan to keep attacking the United States. There's a point where they essentially take the Asian student hostage, and they take his car. English is not his first language, and it seems he's probably struggling a bit to understand the language and to express himself. And throughout this entire stretch, you're just wondering, what is he going to do? How is he going to handle this situation? You feel like you're in his shoes. And I remember actually hearing some of this story on the news, but I was not aware of this detail about this Asian student. So I appreciated having this new insider information. And again, you get to be a fly on the wall, and you anticipate what is going to happen next. There is also a scene where the two brothers get ambushed by the police. I couldn't help but think of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and how they would do anything to get out of that situation. Well, it was similar with the two brothers. And if what happened in the movie is anything close to what happened in real life, wow, this scene will blow you away. It's like these two guys were willing to wage war. It was literally like a war. And it was being waged on this little residential street in the city of Watertown. And so this is where you see J.K. Simmons' character really come into the picture. Similar to the bombing, I am really not sure how they pulled this scene off. It must have taken a huge amount of choreography, as well as steps to ensure that nobody got injured. And another scene that really stood out to me has to do with that couple of Jessica and Patrick. They had both been taken to different hospitals, and they didn't know where each other was. And I won't give it away, but what happened to them, besides the fact that they had hardship, had a lot of coincidence and irony. And it makes a lot of sense why this story would be included in this movie. This was a tight script, and for me, a measure of a good movie is when you are completely swept away in what is happening on the screen. You kind of lose yourself, and you're caught up in the story. That completely happened to me during this movie. I was actually taking notes while I was watching the movie, so I'd know what I wanted to chat about in this podcast. And something that has rarely happened to me since I've been doing these podcasts is I got so caught up in the movie that I stopped taking notes. And I'd realize it, and I'd have to go backtrack, and then the same thing would happen over and over. So this is a very compelling and engrossing movie. Something else that I really liked that they did was at the end, they had interviews with some of the real people who'd gone through the true experience. In some movies, I see this at the end. They might show a photo of someone. They might put some words up about what had happened. In this case, they actually had the people on camera talking about how this experience affected their lives. And the message was clear that despite the difficulty that this bombing had on the community, it brought everyone together, and it showed how strong Boston is as a community. And it was really inspiring to watch. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most excellent movie, I would give this one a 10. Now, there is violence, as I mentioned, so definitely be aware of not allowing younger people to watch this movie. It could definitely be traumatizing, and yet what I appreciate is I believe that the violence is not gratuitous. It's probably close to what actually happened, and in that way, it actually captures something historical. Now, something else to keep in mind is because the movie is somewhat traumatizing, we are, at least right now, in a pandemic. We have a lot going on in our country, and if your nervous system is overloaded, this probably is not the best movie to watch. I myself have been avoiding movies like this just for that reason, but because it is 9/11, I really did want to watch movies that was going to commemorate that event and or demonstrate the patriotism that our country has. Now stay tuned for the next segment of the show when I'll be looking at the movie all at once after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome to the third segment of this show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. In the last segment, I talked about the movie Patriots Day. I'm now going to discuss the movie called All at Once. This movie came out in 2016. It's an hour and 52 minutes long. It's rated TV-MA for mature audiences because there's language, drug use, and hints of sexual interactions. And this movie has won some awards. John Abrahams, who's the director, won Best of the Fest at the Buffalo Dreams Fantastic Film Festival. And it also won at the same festival Best Actor, also for John Abrahams, and Best Drama Feature for John Abrahams. John Abrahams was the director of this movie, but also he was the lead actor. And as I've mentioned in past podcasts, doing two big roles like that on a film is a hard job. So clearly he did well considering he won awards for both acting and directing. He also won a Best Actor award for the movie What Are the Odds at the New York International Independent Film and Video Festival. This is the first feature film that he's directed. He also directed the movie Clover, and there's a movie that he directed that's in post-production called Exploited. He's acted in such movies as Dead Man Walking, Outside Providence, Meet the Parents, Hitchcock, and 10 Things We Should Do Before We Break Up. He plays the character James Maxwell in this movie. And in the movie, he becomes the guardian of two sisters. One of them, named Alexis, is played by Sasha Frolova, and this appears to be her first major role in a feature film. Since this movie, she's been in such movies as Red Sparrow, Little Women, Kindred Spirits, and Wild Nights with Emily. Nicole Elizabeth Berger plays her sister Grace, and she's been in the movies Goldberg P.I., Prescient, The Place of No Words, and Clover. And this movie stars Annie Potts. She's been nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Motion Picture Acting Debut Female for Corvette Summer, and she also was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Comedy Series for Love and War. She also won Best Animated Female for the voice of Bo Peep in Toy Story 4 through the Alliance of Women Film Journalists. And currently you can see her in the sitcom Young Sheldon. She plays his grandmother. She's been in a lot of television, including such series as Designing Women, Love and War, Dangerous Minds, Joan of Arcadia, and Law and Order Special Victims Unit. She's also been in some movies, including the 2016 version of Ghostbusters, Humor Me, and As Good As You. And lastly, Mickey Sumner's in this movie. She was nominated for Best Ensemble Performance with the cast of Marriage Story at the Faroe Island Film Festival. And she was also nominated as Best Supporting Actress for the movie Frances Ha in the International Online Cinema Awards. She's been in such movies as Girl Most Likely, The Meyerowitz Stories, Battle of the Sexes, and Now Is Everything. As I mentioned, this movie is about a man whose best friends, who had two daughters, were killed in the 9/11 attacks. They had worked in the World Trade Center. In the opening of the movie, we see a girl playing Fur Elise on the piano, and then we see James Maxwell in the audience, and he's a little bit spaced out. He's just distracted, and then we see a flashback. And the flashback has him at the opening of an art show, and there's a reporter and a photographer there to get a story about the show, as well as about him as the artist. He makes his way over to a couple of his friends, and these are the parents of the two girls. And you can tell that these are his absolute best friends. They keep nothing from each other, they are very comfortable with each other, and they meet up after the art show. When he comes in, he tells them that everything in his art show sold. Now, For the most part, this movie went along without any bumps, but that piece I found hard to believe. You could see the art on the walls in the gallery, and it just wasn't that outstanding, as far as I can tell. And knowing many artists, it's lucky if an artist actually sells 1 or 2 paintings in a show like this. But I get that at this point in the movie, we're trying to show James at the top of his game. He's finally finding success as an artist and coming into his own. And by the way, this gallery show happens on September 10th, 2001. The next morning, his girlfriend calls him into the other room. He's hungover from the night before, but he sees the television screen and he thinks that this must be some strange movie. But she explains that it is indeed real. And then he yells no, and he gets on the phone, and he can't get through on the phone to reach either of his friends. And then he says he's going downtown to find them. Then we see a scene where James is meeting with what turns out to be his friend's lawyer. And to his surprise, they wanted him to be the guardian of their 2 daughters. James is baffled because they had never talked about this before, and he was taken completely off guard and not feeling very ready for this responsibility. But upon learning that the alternative was for the 2 girls to go into foster care, likely in 2 separate homes, he knew what he needed to do. Then we flash back to the present moment at the recital. The girl who is Grace, who is one of the daughters that he becomes a guardian of, the younger daughter, she does a great job and they meet after the recital. And someone is there who's the head of a music school, and he talks about the possibility of Grace coming to that school. However, it's very expensive, and she'd need a full scholarship, which is next to impossible. Meanwhile, the older daughter, Alexis, she didn't come to the recital. She had her own plans, romantic plans that were not on the up and up. The next day, James finds out that besides just being an artist, he is an art teacher, and he's being laid off from his job at a public school. And then we see James out with his girlfriend, and she's with another guy. And frankly, it was a little bit hard to understand this scene. At first, I didn't realize that it was James's girlfriend that he was with, because she seemed so connected to the other guy that I thought maybe those 2 were girlfriend and boyfriend, and James was just along with them. In any case, the guy they're with seems to push James's buttons like crazy, and he has already a lot of frustration and resentment built up about the fact that he has chosen to become the guardian of these 2 girls. I'm sure he wouldn't trade positions, but at the same time, it comes with its frustrations. And this guy they're with just seems to have no big picture idea of what has been going on in the world. After this outing, James's girlfriend comes running after him when he decides to go home, and she talks about how the relationship isn't quite working for her anymore. So we see that everything in James's life is getting upended. The one thing that seems to be falling into place is that he learns about a lead as an art teacher at a school in Buffalo where he grew up. He'd spent so many years trying to leave Buffalo, and yet that is where his family is, and it's where it's less expensive to live, and he decides that that's where he and the girls are going to need to go. The rest of this movie is about them adjusting to life in Buffalo, but also still to adjust to what it's like to have had your life impacted by what happened on 9/11 with the loss of these 2 people. I really appreciate in this movie how it focuses on what the aftermath of 9/11 is. So often we think of 9/11 and we think of the actual tragedy of the day, but there's enormous fallout. So many people's lives were directly affected and also indirectly affected. And I appreciated being able to see into the lives of some people who were directly affected. Alexa demonstrates life as a typical teen, but also a really angry teen. She's angry at the world for her parents being taken away. Over and over, she makes it clear that James is not her father. Meanwhile, her younger sister Grace, who seems to be probably around 10, 11, 12, she actually calls James Daddy. So there's a big contrast between these girls. Grace seems to be a Miss Goody Two-Shoes. She'll do anything to please James. It's like she's terrified that another parent will go away, and so she'll do anything to make everything right. So while Alexa complains a lot, she pushes and acts out. She smokes and sneaks out to go to parties and experiments with drugs. She also rebels with this boyfriend who is back in New York. She's just having a hard time adjusting. In part because she pretty much refuses to adjust. But James really bends over backwards to make things work. He puts up with her resistance, and he keeps pushing and pushing. He gets her a job at his family's Italian restaurant in Buffalo. And soon she starts making connections. She's getting closer to members of the family, and she hates to admit it, but things are starting to fall a bit more into place for her. That is, until she starts acting irresponsibly and gets found out. Meanwhile, Grace is trying to make steps forward, but at the same time, she's a little reluctant to make friends and settle in. She starts with a new music teacher, and she doesn't really connect with him. He's so different from her old piano teacher. And he plays a different kind of music, the blues. And in fact, the piano teacher is played by the well-known actor Stephen McKinley Henderson. He won the Virtuoso Award through the Santa Barbara International Film Festival for the movie Fences. He also won part of the Best Cast Ensemble for the movie Ladybird through the Awards Circuit Community Awards, as well as the Cine Euphoria Awards. And there's a really precious scene when Grace has her first lesson with him, and he is very gentle with her, understands she's a little resistant, and he talks a lot about his history with music. It was, for me, one of the more memorable scenes in the movie. And then there's another plot point, and this is where James has a love interest. He meets Bridget. She's from England, and she also teaches at the same school that he's teaching at, and she's a drama teacher. I love the scene where the two meet. It's clear that they're kind of rubbing each other the wrong way, and at the same time, there's definitely chemistry. And this makes for a very interesting dynamic between the two. They seem to be connecting, and they are spending more time together throughout the movie. But what seems to be true for all of the characters is this new reality of having this new family seems to be getting in everybody's way on some level. And so this has an impact on this new love relationship that James has. Now, I also love the character of James's mother. She is a kind woman. She's grandmotherly, but also like a really cool grandmother. She's caring, and she's one of the few people that really understands the dynamics of what's going on and knows how to support James and the girls through it. And this is a very lucky thing because they are going through their trials and a few tribulations. What we also see is James's character is impassioned. It's clear that he comes from an Italian family, he's very expressive, and it's not a big deal for him to yell, especially when he wants to land a message onto the girls. I will say that this movie does come to a culmination and a good resolution. I won't go into those because I don't want to give it away, but overall I'd say this is a heartwarming story, and that the best is made out of a very difficult situation. I do think that the movie could have made a bigger point about the fact that these girls' parents were lost in 9/11. It might have been interesting to see them in some kind of group therapy circle or getting some kind of counseling, something to bring greater acknowledgement to what it is that they indeed had gone through. It's one thing to lose your parents, which is a horrible tragedy no matter how you cut it. But for them to be lost in a terror attack that the whole world was aware of, it just seems to me that there would be some more special circumstances that might surround the kind of care that they would need. Perhaps they'd have nightmares. I just think this movie missed an opportunity here to drive that home a bit more. It seemed instead the movie used 9/11 as a jumping off point for the rest of the story. And why 9/11? It could have been any event. So I think there should have been some deeper reason for why 9/11 was the impetus for the rest of the story. Now, I thought the acting in this movie was really wonderful. There are some very good actors in this movie, not necessarily name actors, but they knew their stuff. These are mostly B and C level actors probably, and maybe a few newcomers. But it was well cast, and each of the actors really played off of each other well. I felt like I understood the relationship. I felt each character had their own essence, and I didn't feel like they were extraneous characters. Even members of the family. It was a broad family, and while I didn't know each of their names necessarily, they each had their own personality. And members of the family in particular were funny, they were very Italian, very outspoken, kind of quirky and goofy. They were very fun to watch. But we also didn't really get to see the girls adjusting to school, and I think that probably would have gone a long way in showing how the girls were settling in. I would also say that I felt that the end wrapped up a little too cleanly. I won't give it away, but it did feel like the resolution was too perfect. There were seeds that were planted earlier in the movie, that more or less get resolved at the end of the movie, but it seems like it's pretty unrealistic, especially in the short period of time that everything transpires. And also, things seem to come together pretty easily in terms of their move to Buffalo. It turns out James's mom maybe has this extra house. I would have thought that maybe she'd live there with them. Or we'd come to understand what her arrangement was, that she could allow James to have this big house all to himself and the girls. There was no sense that any of them were very wealthy. And also James was able to land this job as a teacher pretty easily. I would think after 9/11, when things were pretty tough, it might have been hard to get a job. And granted, while he had someone put in a good word for him, I think that we'd still see him looking for other work, seeing what other options were available to him. Despite these small little things, I did find it pretty easy to forgive because so many of the interactions with the actors felt real. I was carried away by the story. Each character, I felt, had a certain magnetism. And after the movie was over, I just thought that was a good movie. Some parts stuck with me and were memorable. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most excellent film, I would give this movie an 8. And despite some language and some of the behavior that is shown in the movie, I would think this might be a good one to sit down and watch with a teen, especially if they don't know a whole lot about 9/11. 9/11 happened 19 years ago today, and so any children who were born within a year or two after it happened, they won't have a memory of it. And they may not understand the impact on many children from that time. This movie could offer a way in to talk about what happened. So stay tuned for the final segment of the show when I'll be sharing my thoughts on the movie World Trade Center after the break.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome to the last segment of the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron, and in the prior segment, I talked about the movie All at Once. I'm now going to discuss the movie World Trade Center. This movie came out in 2006, so just 5 years after the 9/11 attacks happened. It's 2 hours and 9 minutes long. It's rated PG-13. It's considered a drama, historical, as well as a thriller. At the Hollywood Film Awards, Oliver Stone won Director of the Year for this movie, and he also won Hollywood Movie of the Year. The National Board of Review, USA, also named it the Freedom of Expression Award winner, and this movie had a number of other nominations. Now, Oliver Stone is the director of this movie, and he's a 3-time Oscar winner. He won Best Director for Born on the 4th of July, he won Best Director for Platoon, and he won Best Writing Screenplay based on material from another medium for Midnight Express. He also won a Golden Globe for Best Director for Motion Picture for JFK, and he won similar awards for Golden Globes as the Oscars. He has also won a number of other awards as well as nominations. And he seems to be equally as much of a screenwriter as a director, and among the other movies he's directed include Talk Radio, Wall Street, The Doors, Nixon, W, and Snowden. He seems to definitely have a niche when it comes to political and national interests. This movie stars Nicolas Cage as the lead character, John McLaughlin. He is an Oscar winner, having won Best Actor in a Leading Role for Leaving Las Vegas. He was also nominated for Best Actor in a Leading Role for the movie adaptation. He also won a Golden Globe for his performance in Leaving Las Vegas. And he's had a number of other nominations and wins. and he's been in such movies as Birdie, Raising Arizona, Time to Kill, Snake Eyes, The Weatherman, National Treasure, and Snowden. And this movie stars Michael Pena as Will Hemino. He's kind of like the sidekick to John McLaughlin. He has won a number of awards, including Special Achievement in Film for Cesar Chavez that he shared with a few others, including Rosario Dawson. And this is at the ALMA Awards. And years earlier, for the same awards, he won Outstanding Actor in a Motion Picture for the movie Crash. He also was part of the Best Cast Ensemble Award winner for Crash through the Awards Circuit Community Awards. And he's won a number of other awards as well as nominations. Other movies he's been in include The Lincoln Lawyer, $1 Million Baby, The Martian, A Wrinkle in Time, and 12 Strong. Maria Bello plays Donna McLaughlin, John's wife. She was nominated for Golden Globes for Best Performance by an Actress in a Motion Picture Drama for A History of Violence, and Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role in a Motion Picture for The Cooler. She's been in such movies as Coyote Ugly, Thank You for Smoking, Towelhead, The Jane Austen Book Club, The Fifth Wave, and Giant Little Ones. And Maggie Gyllenhaal is in this movie. She is the winner of a Golden Globe for Best Performance by an Actress in a Miniseries or Motion Picture made for television for The Honorable Woman. And she was nominated for Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role for an Oscar for Crazy Heart. Other movies she's been in include Donnie Darko, Secretary, Adaptation, Mona Lisa Smile, The Dark Knight, and The Kindergarten Teacher. And last but not least, there is a very small role that Viola Davis plays. Even though it's a small role, it makes a big impact. Now, Viola Davis is an Oscar winner. She won Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role for the movie Fences, and she's been in the movies Traffic, Antoine Fisher, Solaris, Syriana, Doubt, and The Help. Similar to Patriots Day, with such a cast, you would expect this to be a great movie, and it does not disappoint. Now, again, this is quite a movie. It's traumatizing. There's some very difficult things that happen in the movie. So if your nervous system is already kind of maxed out with everything going on in the world, this may not be the best movie to see. But if you want to remember patriotism, want to remember how Americans stand for each other, and if you want just a good story that you can get wrapped up in, this movie will deliver. Oliver Stone at this point is a great storyteller, and he knows how to take a script and make the most of it. And this movie was cast really well. I think all the actors were well positioned. I actually wouldn't have originally thought of Nicolas Cage for the lead role, but I feel like he kind of knocked it out of the park. I hardly recognized him. He played a character who took his job really seriously. John McLaughlin had worked in the New York Port Authority for more than 20 years, and I felt that essence come off of Nicolas Cage. It seemed like he had been around the block. So this movie starts on September 11th. It's 3:30 in the morning. Nicolas Cage's character, John McLaughlin, he gets up, he showers, he gets ready to go to work. He drives into New York City. Then we cut over to another man who's leaving his house. He gets in his van, and eventually we learn that this is Will Hemino, and he reports to John McLaughlin. And we see then scenes of New York City waking up. Similar as with the movie Patriots Day, we know what's going to happen, but in this movie we get to be a fly on the wall. We get to experience what those who were up close to what happened with the trade towers specifically went through. And so as the audience, we are anticipating what is going to happen to these men. They don't yet know the danger that's coming their way. They could never predict this is such an unusual thing that happened. Yet we as the audience know, and we're looking out for them. It keeps us on the edge of our seat. There's not a lot we can do, but we're anticipating. The morning starts out normally, with Nicolas Cage as one of the leaders of the small Port Authority police station. He gives orders to all of the officers that report to him. You can see that he runs a tight ship. All the officers know what to do, they know how to play it safe, and the assignments are given. Then we see a couple of guys in this police office having a conversation, and the building shutters. One guy runs out to see what is going on. There's another officer out in the street, and similarly, there's a shaking sensation that happens. It's almost as if it was an earthquake. And yet this is New York, not very well known for its earthquakes. Then he checks his radio and sees there's an announcement that all units are called to come to a central location. Orders have come through that everyone needs to get down to the World Trade Center. They're going to help evacuate Building 1. A plane has flown into it. All the officers load into a bus, and meanwhile, Nicolas Cage's character, John McLaughlin, drives with a commander in a police SUV down to the World Trade Center, and they have a conversation. John McLaughlin essentially admits that everything that's going on, as hard as they try, they're really not prepared for what is about to come. Once there, McLaughlin leads the team to get equipment. It's clear to him that they have to do this safely, and he's determined to be sure that they have oxygen tanks and masks and all the gear that is necessary to keep them safe so that they can help the people out of the building. Now, there have been mixed messages about what might happen to Tower 2, but based on what McLaughlin knows, the only damage has happened to Tower 1, and Tower 1 is still standing. They go to fetch equipment in the basement of Tower 2, and as they return, they have an eerie feeling. They see lots of people around, they see damage to the building, nothing is quite the same, and then things start to shake. And you can see the terror appear in their eyes. They can tell something big is about to happen, but they don't quite know what it is. And so John McLaughlin does what any leader would do. He wants to keep his men safe, and he tells everyone to go to the elevator shaft. It's the one structural place that he feels would stay solid. And while they make it in there in time, well, we know from history that the building collapses. It first appears that a good number of his men are okay. They may be buried in rubble, but they have survived the shaking. They do a roll call of names, and there's a good number of them who respond. But having never been through something like this before, there are things that they didn't expect. They didn't know that debris would keep falling. They didn't know that pieces of debris were going to be on fire when they fell. And eventually, it's pretty much Himeno and McLaughlin who are under the rubble, who are still alive, and the movie at that point kind of shifts. It goes between McLaughlin and Himeno trying to stay alive, keeping each other company, while we get to see their families and what they go through as they wonder whether or not these men are still alive. Himeno's wife Allison is pregnant and they have a young daughter, and McLaughlin's family, well, he has 4 children. He was also in the middle of redoing their home kitchen. As the 2 men recount what their families are like, what their children's names are, what their wives' names are, we get to actually see these people. The scene shifts to the families, so we get to see what's going on with them. In particular with McLaughlin, as he thinks about his wife and having their 4th child. There's some very touching moments between Himeno and McLaughlin. They both have major injuries, and yet their mental fitness is really tough, and they keep fighting for each other. Something that McLaughlin talks about is how if they sleep, they may never wake up. That with their injuries, it's really important that they stay awake, and that is very tough. They're under the rubble for hours. At one point, we see that the police are calling off the search for that night. They feel it's just not safe. But there is a flash to where we see this man who was a Marine. He's not from New York, but he actually goes to church because he is feeling called to go to the World Trade Center. He puts on his Marine garb and he heads over there, and he does a search at night. He's tough. He feels saving people is what he's meant to do. He knows he can do it, and he actually ends up meeting another Marine, and together they do a search. We get to see whether McLaughlin and Himeno will actually make it out. I can imagine that Nicolas Cage and Michael Peña's roles were really hard. Here they were buried under all this rubble. I don't know how they pulled this off in terms of filming. I have a feeling they did a lot of special effects, and that's true for the entire World Trade Center coming down. With all the dust and all the paper exploding, it was created very realistically. In any case, these 2 actors, they're stuck under rubble, and they need to show a wide range of emotion. While I think based on the surroundings, it would be relatively easy for them to go into their imagination and feel like they were really trapped, as well as injured, it's hard to stay stiff for a really long time. They are both very believable. I would say at a certain point, Michael Peña's character does seem to be better off than he started out as. He seemed to have more upper body movement than I would have expected, and that seemed a little bit far-fetched. But my guess is this was a very thoroughly researched story, and that it was probably based on truth. At the very least, I like to think it was, and that what was portrayed was realistic. Meanwhile, we get to see, as I mentioned, the 2 wives. They are very different characters. And honestly, I really liked Maggie Gyllenhaal's job as Allison Himeno, yet she seemed to be a really odd match to me to her husband's character. But she seemed very real and in the moment. There's a really interesting scene where she and her brother-in-law and sister-in-law go to a drugstore together. And it's a very real scene. It's one to look out for. And when it comes to Donna McLaughlin, Well, there are moments that she seems like she's really in denial about what's going on. The younger son in that family really wants to go find his father. He has this sense that they have to go do something. And Donna says that it's just not safe, that they can't do it. She comes across as a very strong woman, and yet in this instance, it felt in some ways like she was more of a victim, that shouldn't she want to do everything she possibly could to see that her husband is alive? I guess considering the strength that she seemed to exude, it was hard to believe the level of fear that she seemed to have. Now, eventually these two women do end up going to the hospital. This is in hopes that their husbands will appear. And they discover that many people have been to the hospital posting photos of their loved ones, hoping that someone might know something. And there's this really tender scene where Donna is getting some coffee out of a machine, and there stands Viola Davis's character. She's a mother who is just there, hoping that she's going to find her son. Her son was an elevator operator, and he was a good kid. And these two women, they just bond. They both understand what they're going through with the potential of losing their loved one. This little scene seems to capture an essence. It's a feeling that everybody who was present at 9/11 felt, that when one person was hurt or hurting, then all of us were hurt and hurting. And we're all there to help lift each other up and have compassion for each other and help each other heal. So I love that scene, and Viola Davis did a fabulous job. In each of the movies that I've seen her in, she seems to have this one moment that illuminates her deepest feelings, and she goes really deep. And this was one of those moments. You can feel the palpability of what this loss would be to her. I'm not going to give away what happens at the end. I'm going to guess that you'll probably guess. It seems to me that the point of this movie is to demonstrate the heart that Americans together have, and a level of patriotism and commitment that they have. Seems to me that the movie is meant to be uplifting, how like as a phoenix we can rise up out of the ashes. It does seem like some things were done with some creative license to make the story a little bit more dramatic, but then again, possibly not, because although the story was written by Andrea Berloff, the true story was actually put together by John McLaughlin, Donna McLaughlin, William Hemino, and Allison Hemino. So the people who truly went through it, they are the ones that are telling the story. There's also a point where we see Donna and Allison pass each other in the hospital. They seemed not to know each other. I don't know if there would have been some kind of holiday party where all of the officers from the Port Authority would get together. So maybe they'd glimpsed each other before, but it seemed like they didn't know each other. And after this movie, I imagine that they all got to know each other quite well. Other than the things I mentioned, overall, this story held together really well. Again, I found it very gripping. I wanted to know what was going to happen next. Considering this was a story about two men who were buried in rubble, ultimately, and were kind of stuck there, this story held up quite well, and it kept me going. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being most excellent movie, I would give this movie a 10. Again, keep in mind the violence and the difficult situation that these men are in. This story is probably not for someone who is younger, but as I mentioned, it could be, again, something seen with a teen to explain really what happened on 9/11. Similar to Patriots Day, this movie did not shy away from showing what really happened that day and giving a true sense of the occurrences. While it's a tough movie, it is inspiring, watching these families as an example of many, many other families get through this remarkable day. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the movies Sundogs, which are rated a 7, Patriots Day, which are rated a 10, All at Once, which are rated an 8, and World Trade Center, which are rated a 10. Here's to these movies offering some inspiration and some patriotism. This is your host, Elizabeth Aaron, signing out. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask you to please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.